I'm Dr. Saleendran, Assistant Professor, Department of Psychology, Sri Krishna Arts and Science College. Today, I'll be speaking on the test of sound measurement. So, there are three important criteria to find whether a data instrument or the scale developed by a researcher is good or not. For that, there are three criteria. One is the reliability, validity, and the practicality. Reliability is the consistency of a test, and validity is whether the test is measured what it was supposed to measure. Practicality is whether administration of the test is practically possible or not. So we'll try to see in detail what these three criteria are. The first criteria is the reliability. Reliability is whether the test instrument is measuring or what has measured is very consistent or not. So the test should be very consistent. For example, supposing if I am measuring an IQ of an individual when he was about 5 years, and if I say it is about 101, even after 10 years, if I measure his IQ, it should be 110 by the same instrument. Supposing if there is any change, I can say that my test is not reliable. So that is what we call it as a reliability. To test this reliability, there are different tests. We'll see what are the different tests for it. One is what we call it as a test retest method. In the test retest method is the administrator or the researcher will administer the test, and after a particular period of time he once again administer the same test to the same individual. So he collects the information from the people or the data from the subjects first time, and after a week or two or after a month, once again he administer the same instrument to the same group of people. That's for the second time, and after then we have to find the coefficient of correlation between these two. If the coefficient of correlation is high, then we can say that the test is having a high reliability. The next method is what we call it as a split half method. This is to test the internal consistency of an instrument. So normally when you develop or when we develop a questionnaire, there may be several items that are related to the parameter which you are going to measure it. So for example, if I am trying to measure the self-confidence of an individual, so there may be around 20 to 30 items which are related to the parameter which I am going to measure, that is the self-confidence. So here the researcher, what he does is he administers the test to a group of people, for example 10 or 15. Then he collects the data from these people or the subjects. Then he divides the whole questionnaire into 2 halves. Most of the time what we do is we try to divide the whole questionnaire into the odd number item, a numbered item, and the even numbered item, and we try to find the correlation between these two. That is the 2 odd and even items. If the correlation is high, then we can say that the test is having an internal consistency. The meaning here is all the items in the questionnaire, it is trying to measure something, so then the results will be highly consistent. So that is what we call it as an internal consistency. The third method is what we call it as a parallel or alternative form of testing this reliability. So in the parallel form, the researcher develops 2 equivalent tests. That is, it contains the same kind of items, but they are not as the same items. So that is, the instrument will be measuring the same thing in a different manner. So what he does is, the researcher, he administers the test first and he collects the information from the respondents. Then after some time he might be administering the other form or the other test which he has developed earlier. Once again he tries to administer to the people, and these two sets of the items or the data which he has collected, he tries to find the correlation between these two, and if the correlation is very high, then we can say that the test is having a high reliability. The third one is what we call it as an inter-rater method. So inter-rater reliability method refers to the extent to which two or more individuals agree. For example, here a researcher might be administering a particular test. He collects the data from the respondent. Then his assistant might be administering the same test to the same group of people, and once again he collects this information, and if the two data are being correlated, if it is giving a high correlation, then we can say that it is having an inter-rater, or we can say that the test is having a high reliability. So next is we are talking about this validity. So validity is whether the test is measuring what it's supposed to measure. For example, supposing if I am trying to measure the anxiety of an individual, my test should measure anxiety alone. It should not measure motivation or self-confidence or emotion, etc. So this is what we call it as a validity. So validity is whether the test is measuring what it's supposed to measure or proposed to measure. This is what we call it as a validity. To test this validity, there are different methods. One is what we call it as a content validity. The content validity is whether the test instrument or the items in the instruments are measuring what it's supposed to measure. This we call it as a content validity. To make a judgment about the questioner, so what the researcher has to do is he has to administer, or he has to give this questionnaire to a panel of experts, and this panel of experts will be seeing all the items in the questionnaire, and he might be giving a feedback or suggestion to the researcher. The researcher, he takes all the suggestions or the feedback from the experts, and he tries to incorporate in his instrument, and he can have a final version of his test. That we call it as a content validity. The other one is what we call it as a face validity. Here also we have to get suggestion from the experts or the subject experts in that particular discipline. So here what the experts will try to see the appearance of the test, and they try to see whether everything is in a particular order and whether it is measuring what is supposed to measure. This we call it as a face validity. So here the face validity is just the general appearance of the test. So that's what we call it as a face validity. The other one we call it as a criterion related validity. In the criterion related validity, there are two validity. One is the concurrent validity, the other one is what we call it as a predictive validity. Concurrent validity indicates the amount of agreement between two different assessments. So here there may be a proven or a method. For example, suppose if I want to measure the personality, so there is a proven method, there is California psychological inventory. By using that inventory, I measure a particular person and say that he is highly self-confident. I develop a particular questionnaire, and my questionnaire also says that this particular individual is having a high self-confidence. Then I can say that my instrument is having a high concurrent validity. So here there are two different assessments. One is the instrument which the researcher has developed it, and there is already a proven method, and he tries to see this the new method with the proven method, and if it is the same, then we can say that his test is having a high concurrent validity. Then the other one is what we call it as a predictive validity. The predictive validity is the degree to which the test scores accurately predicts the score on a criterion measure. For example, supposing if I am administering a particular test, and it is something related to numerical ability, and if a person is passing this particular test, I can say that this individual will be doing well in bank work or something like that. So this we call it. So I'm able to predict it. Is I'm able to predict the behavior of the individual by administering my test. I can say that what will be his future behavior. That we call it as a predictive validity. The next one is what we call it as a construct validity. This construct validity is whether, so here suppose if you take any parameter, there are certain theories. If a researcher is developing a test by using the rationale of a theory, then we can say that it is having a construct validity. So here, based on the theory, you develop a questionnaire, and the questionnaire will be accurately assessing what is supposed to measure. That's the rationale behind it. So that is what we call it as a construct validity. The other is what we call it as a test of practicality. So this test of practicality is basically concerned with the economy, convenience, and the interpretability. If a researcher is developing a data collecting instrument, the instrument should be with a minimal cost, and it should not take more time. Supposing if it is taking more time, or for printing the questionnaire or making a copy of it, if it is cost effective, if it is more costly, then we can say that the test is not economical. The next is we are talking about the convenience. The convenience is the research instrument should be easy for the administrator or the experimenter to administer the test. Supposing if it is easy, then we can say that it is very convenient. For example, here the person who has not developed the question, who has developed the questionnaire, other than him, even if the other person is administering the test, it should be easy for him to administer. That we call it as a convenience. The third one is what we call it as a interpretability. Interpretability is we administer a particular questionnaire or data collection tool or instrument, and we get some data, and the data should be in a position to easily interpret it. So not only by the researcher who has developed that, other than him, the person has to be, it should be easy for him to interpret it. That we call it as a interpretability. So here, at a conclusion, supposing if a researcher wants to develop a instrument, he has to focus on the reliability, validity, and the practicality. If reliability, validity, and practicality, if all the three are good, then he can say that his instrument is having a sound measurement. Thank you.